to our worship service, and we'd like to say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers today. And I tell you, it's a great day to celebrate our mothers, but I believe it's always good to let them know how much you care and how much love that you have for them. If you'll turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 1. 1 Samuel chapter 1. There's a gentleman by the name of David who was running late to play golf one morning. There's a couple of different stories here, and David kind of coupled all three together. And David was kind of running late, and the road and the path that he had to take was quite bumpy, and it shook him up just a little bit. And as he got there with his friends, it was a foursome that were playing golf that day. And he got up to the tee box and he put the golf ball in the tee and teed it up, and he swung. And he said, "I need a do-over." And so he got another ball and he dropped it and just swung. And swung again, and everyone was kind of laughing at him. And he said it was a correction shot. And from that day forward, they began to call it by his last name, the Mulligan. David Mulligan. That's how the mulligan had started. If any of you know what a mulligan is that pretty much if you mess up, you'll get a second shot to try to correct that bad shot you just made. And I believe sometimes in life we need mulligans, don't you? Sometimes we need to take another shot. And today as I began to pray, and this past week I began to pray over what the Lord would have me to talk to you about today. And the Lord dropped in my spirit about the challenges of a mother. The challenges of a mother are much different than they were when I was growing up. As you begin to see each generation, mothers had to be very flexible. They had to adjust on the go, and it's kind of like what a lot of moms are doing today. But the atmosphere of which I grew up has drastically changed. A place where you could go outside and spend all day outside riding bicycles up and down your community and not fearing that someone would get you. Those days are about long gone. But the challenges that women face today and mothers face today, I believe, is something that we can look at and really we can really value our mothers today and really be thankful for what they do for us in our lives. We all know mothers are a gift from God. They're the first people who love us, who care for us, and who nurture us. They show us love and selflessness and sacrifice. And I began to think of this story of Hannah, and I want to read this story to you, and we're just going to dive in just for a few moments today and talk about the challenges of a mother. In 1 Samuel 1, we're going to start in verse 2. Elkanah had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of the heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priests of the Lord at that time were the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to Peninnah and of each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. And year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not eat. And why are you crying, Hannah? And you will see here the husband Elkanah. We husbands sometimes can stick our foot in our mouth, and I believe this was one of them for Elkanah. Would ask, why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better? than having 10 sons. Friend, I'm here to tell you today, for all the husbands in the world, the answer is no. The answer is no. In verse 9, once after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli, the priest, was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle. Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: O Lord of heaven armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. And as she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her. Seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. Must you come here drunk? He demanded. Throw away your wine. Oh, no, sir, she replied. I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I'm very discouraged. And I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. In that case, Eli said, Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. When you begin to read this story of Hannah, you can see Hannah's heart. You understand that she had a desire. That desire was to have a child. And you could see through this, in these few scriptures that I have read to you today, her desire so much so was being even taunted by someone else. Elkanah's other wife would put it in her face and tell her, downgrade her, make her think that she was unworthy because she couldn't bear any children. But Hannah persevered. You didn't see where she lashed out at her, but she went to the Lord. And I believe if we ever have a chance in this world to know that our kids are in God's hands, that is through the order of prayer and the prayer life of a mother. I can remember times in my own life where I was doing things that I should not be doing, and my mother was praying for me. How do I know she was praying for me? Because the time I got in the door, she done knew what was going on. I tell you, mothers know how to get in touch with God, and I'm thankful for my mother. There's been instances in your life where your mother has prayed for you even when you didn't know she was praying. I guarantee you, just like Hannah began to pray because it was her heart's desire, and she said, Lord, if you allow me to have this child, I will dedicate him back to you. We see beautiful ceremonies when child is born and their parents bring them up and dedicate them back to the Lord, and those are great things. But what's more important than a sermon or a ceremony of dedicating your child to the Lord is simply learning how to persevere through the hard times and the hardships and the times that you don't know exactly what to do or how to handle a situation. To persevere and to pray and to seek God and understand that this is a gift from God. Just as a mother declares her children a gift from the Lord, a godly mother is a gift from the Lord for the child. And I'm so thankful. I remember growing up, I didn't understand why Mama had to be all up in my business. Come on, somebody. She had to know where I was going, who I was going to be with, what time was I planning to be there. See, we didn't have trackers in our phones like we do today. And we didn't have a telephone in our pocket. My mom would call where I was going, even if it was a restaurant. If she didn't feel like I was there, she'd be calling McDonald's up to see if Doug Studdard was there. Or if I would go over a friend's house, she would say, make sure you called when you got there. And if I didn't call, she would call. If she didn't get me or she didn't know I was there, if I just forgot, I would see her car coming to the driveway. Even to this day, I try not to tell my mother my doctor's appointments, because I will get a call every day reminding me of my doctor's appointment 6 months from now. That's how much she cared. But the reality is there are challenges today in balancing life, balancing the home, balancing now the work life and the family life. Proverbs 31:27 and 28 says this: she carefully watches everything in her household and suffers nothing from laziness. Her children stand and bless her, and her husband praises her. I tell you, there's times we overlook the values of our mothers. Sometimes we overlook and see all of the things that we take for granted. I remember growing up, I didn't have to worry about my laundry until I got married. I didn't have to worry about food being on the table until I had to have the chance of providing the food to be prepared and placed on a table. The reality is there's challenges even today as we work, and the moms work with schedule after schedule, ball games, schools, extracurricular activities, all those things coupled in sometimes can be very overwhelming. Sometimes we get so stressed out because we're just thinking about what we have to do in a week's time. I'm sure mothers can get easily stressed out. I believe that it's very important that we remember all that our mothers do for us. Not only as young kids, but as adults, all that our mothers had sacrificed and have done for us growing up. You know, there's times that we understand that when we get in the rut of life and we're balancing work life and family life, sometimes God seems to be squeezed out of the scenario. We forget to pray, or we forget to do our devotions, or we forget to do the little things. But they are very important, and I encourage you today to strive that even though life gets hectic, to point and make a point to prioritize your prayer life with God, to make sure that God is still number one in your life and that you are still doing all that God has called you to do. Being a mother is a great calling in one's life. To do it with excellence, to do it with grace, and do it with mercy can only be accomplished through allowing God to be center and the most important thing to you. We have to learn, and the women and ladies have to learn how to use the support of others, things around you, your spouses. And remember, God helps you, and God will give you strength. There's other challenges that they face, financial challenges. In this last days, we've seen where inflation has skyrocketed. We know very well how, when you go to the grocery store, how much our bill has increased. And preparing those things sometimes get overwhelming. But Philippians 4:19 says this: and this same God who takes care of me will supply all your needs from his glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus. To put it in the King James Version, and my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in glory. We must remember that regardless of what the economy does, we are living in the economy of the kingdom of God. And what affects this world doesn't affect God, because God knows exactly what we're going through. And He understands the heart of the mother who goes into the grocery store and has to pick and choose exactly what to buy or what not to buy. He sees everything, and we know that He is our supplier. He is our help and our provision. And I'm so thankful that even in the challenges of life, that God is there and God will meet every need that we have. Aren't you thankful for that today? Another thing is a challenge of taking care of themselves and caring for others. We all know what Mark 12:30 and 31 says. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. What I've found in a lot of times in ministry is sometimes we just get burnt out. Ladies and moms are no different. They get burned out. I know quite often through my home, I know when we're in trouble, when we hear, whose time is it to do the dishes? And it's my time. I know I'm in trouble. But you know, there's things in our life that we must understand. We get so busy helping others. Moms get so busy in making sure their kids' clothes are clean, food on the table. They're going to their next ball game or their next activity, and they're really into the social scene, and that they're really well-rounded, and they're doing everything that they possibly can. But sometimes we must understand that if we don't take, and moms, if you don't take care of yourselves, then there runs a risk of burnout, stress. My dad gave me a wise statement long ago when he was saying or seeing that I was putting in extra hours than he thought I ought to. He would say, son, you can't help others when you're sick, or you can't help others when you're stressed, and you can't help others if you're dead. In other words, what he was telling me is that I have to take time to stop and make sure that I take care of myself. And I'm not saying this in a selfish way, but my time with God and your time with God is very, very important. Do we take the time to stop what we're doing and collectively look at our life and make some adjustments and changes in our life that will allow us to have the rest we need to go every day? The challenges of a mother are very great, and sometimes it's hard to find those few moments that you can stop and take that moment. But I encourage you today to take those moments. Don't take them for granted. The times that maybe you're able to slip on your bed and take a quick nap, there's nothing wrong with that. But take time to regenerate, and take time for yourself so that you too can help others. The last thing we see in today's world, the challenges that mothers face today, is social and cultural pressures and challenges. I don't know about you, but back in the old days, you could just tell it like it is, and they'd have to either lump it or leave it or get with it or like it or don't. You didn't have to worry about a lawsuit every time you turned around because somebody's going to sue you because they didn't like what you said. We face those challenges today where offense is so rapid. We change in those challenges how people think we ought to raise, and how mothers ought to raise their children, and how they should handle different social situations and cultural pressures. They want to make us feel like mothers are out of line, and that they're not caught up with today, and that they don't understand what's going on in the world around us because we're not doing everything, or mothers are not doing everything that everybody else is doing. Romans 12:2 says this: don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. The New King James says it this way: and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. I want to encourage you, mothers, today to understand that your job is not for everyone to like your kids, but your job is to grow them up in the goodness and kindness of God and knowing who God is. I tell you today, in Deuteronomy, it tells us just what we need to do and just what all of us need to do. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 says, listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength. And you must commit yourself wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you're on the road and when you're going to bed and when you are getting up. What we are to teach our children. Mothers, what we are to teach our children. Fathers, what we are to teach our children. Our family is to love God and love God alone. To love Him with our whole heart, with all of our soul, and all of our strength. In today's world, the challenges the mother are great. But I'm here to tell you today, our God is greater. Our God understands. He knows what you're going through. He sees the struggle. And we can see the struggle that Hannah had faced. And we see her dedication and her desire that even if God would grant this one request, that she would dedicate her son back to the Lord. And she kept that promise. Several years after his birth, she took them to Eli and she gave him back to the Lord. I tell you, you live in this life today, you understand more and more the importance of giving your children to the Lord. The importance of praying for them. The importance of interceding for them, because you understand that the need is great and this world has turned from God. But one thing we must always do as a family, as a mother, as a father, is to bring God into all of our situations that we deal with. He tells us quite plainly that in all thy ways we are to acknowledge Him. And all the challenges that we face in our life, all of the situations that we don't know exactly how to cope with, or we don't have the answer at the moment, that we acknowledge Him. And He tells us quite plainly, if we acknowledge Him in those challenging moments, that He will direct our path. Aren't you thankful today that you don't have to wait for the government's opinions to tell you what to do with your children? Aren't you thankful that you can wait upon the Lord and His answer is always the right answer? That His ways is always the better ways? That His thoughts towards us, even in days that we feel like we have failed. Even the mothers, sometimes you want the mulligan, you want the do-over. You wish that I could start this day over again because it didn't turn out like I thought it should. That you have the grace of our precious Lord and Savior. who will tell you, who will encourage you, who will wrap his arms of love around you, who you can sense his presence even in those times when it's so stressful. I can remember one time, and I'm closing with this morning. I know it's a little early and you're excited that the pastor's about to wrap it up. I can remember one time, my mom was a very quiet person. We learned growing up that we let Daddy do all the talking. In pastoral ministry, you understood the importance of letting Daddy do the talking and not you do the talking. Every situation that would develop or everything that might come up, the challenges that might come up, my mom would be sure to express her opinion and her thoughts to my dad, and I do the same thing to my wife. She expresses it to me, and I'll say, I'll handle it. You ever been there? I'll handle it. Don't you handle it? Because, I'm going to handle it because I feel like I can do better, but most times she does the better of it all. But I can remember time and time again, my mama would go to a pew and she would shake everyone's hand and she would just love them. The Spirit would get to moving, and now my mom was very quiet, but when the Spirit of God moved on her, you knew it. And everybody around you knew it. The whole church knew it. She was a shouting and a screaming and a hollering, and I thank God that I had a mama that shouted, screamed, and hollered. But one day I was at school. I was in the 5th grade. And I was the type of person, I didn't like to study a lot. I don't know if we have anybody that feels that way or is like that, but 5th grade, I just was thinking about football and baseball and basketball. I didn't care really much about anything else. But I was getting to a point, we had a progress report, and I knew that if I didn't get my grade up, that I was going to be in trouble. And so I decided one day to actually study for a test. And I studied for that test and studied hard, and I actually had homework that I had to do, and I did that homework. I was very proud. I was actually excited to go to school because I felt like I was going to ace the test and I was going to be the first one to give my paper to the teacher to show her, hey, see, I can do better. I can remember she gave us a test, and I was sitting there and I was happy, man. I read the chapters. I understood what was going on. I answered all the questions. I had placed the book. We had those old desks where you put your books inside your desk. And I put my book inside my desk, and as I was taking the test, the teacher came up to me. And she said, "What are you doing?" And she was talking to the guy behind me, and the guy had stole my homework and started copying my paper. And oh man, I was disheartened. So I was so disheartened. So she said, "Well, both of you getting a 0," because she thought that I simply gave him the homework to copy. And I told her, I said, "No, ma'am." I said, "He took it from my desk, and when you get a reputation, sometimes you have to prove yourself better before they start believing it." You might get that later. But she continued, and I was just so upset because I had took the time to do my homework. I had took the time to do my test and study for my test. And she put it in my face. She said, "Look here, you would even made 100 had you had not cheated." And I said, "Ma'am, I did not cheat. I promise." She wouldn't believe me, and she got mad at me and told me to go to the office. So I, being the good guy that I am, went and called my mama. And I told my mama, I said, "Mama," I said, "they're trying to tell me that I helped this boy cheat, and they gave me a 0 on my homework and my test." I didn't hear anything else. I was saying, Mama. Mama worked second shift at the time. I didn't get to see her that often because most of the time I was going to school early and she was asleep. And by the time I would come home from school and do my activities, she was gone to work. But it wasn't 5 or 6 minutes, my mama came in that school door. And it wasn't the mama that I remembered at all. She came in and her face was red. She didn't even have time to do her hair. Her hair was a mess. And she was so upset. And she come in there and she just gave them the what for. And I tell you, that day I was so proud of my mother. The reality is that mothers sometimes don't tell you all that's going on. And sometimes they don't say a lot of things. But they make up for it in the actions that they do. They make up for it by the times that you come home. Like the times I come home to see my mom and she'll have my favorite meal cooked and ready. Those times, those instances where I'm stressed out and she says, "Son, just let me pray for you." A mother's love goes further than what mothers really realize. The only way you can truly know it is by experiencing the true love of the Father. When you experience the love of God in your life, male or female, it opens the avenue for us to experience love in such a different way. So mothers, I encourage you today, through all the challenges you face in this life, keep doing what you're doing. Keep loving, even though sometimes loving hurts. Keep praying for them, even the times that it feels like there's no progress. Keep loving them. Keep praying for them. Keep lifting them up. Keep reminding God that you have given them to Him. And I guarantee you, you'll overcome any challenge that you will ever face in this life by simply trusting Him. As the musicians come this morning. On this Mother's Day, it's good to see all the children here with your mothers. You don't know how much it really means to a mother when their children come and be with them in church. And I encourage you to do it more than once a year. Make it a habit. When my father died, I made a commitment to my mother that I would call her every day and that I would pray for her and pray with her. And I'm thankful and blessed to be able to do that with my mother. Though miles are far between us, I still value the times that I get to talk with her, to spend time with her over the phone. I try to FaceTime her, but a lot of times I get her ear. But I cherish those times because I learned from my mistake of my father. Of not always talking to him every day. I miss those times. And some of you might not have your mother with you today and you miss those times. But I'm here to tell you today that one way that you can know without a doubt that you'll have those opportunities to speak to them again. If your mother was a Christian, you too can be saved. And one day after a while, you can see her and talk with her. But most importantly, you can see the one who forgave you of all your sins and washed you white as snow. Today as we stand,